Have you ever noticed how the very things that once lit up your world suddenly lose all meaning? The hobbies that used to excite you, the passions that once defined who you were, suddenly feel hollow, almost lifeless. It's as though something inside has died. But is it really death or the beginning of something else? Stay with me, because what feels like loss may be the first glimpse of a deeper transformation. Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists, warned that spiritual awakening isn't always sweetness and light. It can dismantle you piece by piece. One of the earliest signs? The fading of interest in things that used to bring joy. Not because you're lazy, broken, or depressed, but because something profound is shifting in your inner world. Think about it. Before awakening, hobbies often serve the ego. They become ways to show identity: the gamer, the painter, the musician, the athlete. These roles form what Jung called the persona, the social mask you wear. Achievements, recognition, belonging, even distraction from stressor, are wrapped inside these activities. That's why they felt thrilling at first. They fed the me you thought you were. But awakening cracks that mask. Suddenly, winning a game, posting artwork online, or even composing music no longer carries the same fulfillment. Why? Because the part of you that needed those ego rewards is dissolving. What once satisfied the persona no longer nourishes the soul. That lack of motivation is not failure, it's a sign of growth. Jung explained that awakening is a confrontation with the deeper self. And when this inner self rises, it rearranges everything. The old values collapse. Competing, collecting, or proving your worth begins to feel like chasing smoke. The psyche has shifted focus away from the outer mask towards something far more authentic. This is why pleasures tied to recognition, productivity, or achievement suddenly fall flat. Awakening often happens through breathwork, psychedelics, inner reflection, or life experience, but the effect is the same. The outer world loses its shine, and hobbies lose their magic. Because for many, hobbies weren't just activities. They were proofs, ways to feel talented, stylish, accomplished, or enough. And when awakening arrives, the need to prove disappears. What once felt like nourishment now feels like performance. The moment you no longer cling to being the artist or the achiever, the fuel behind those actions evaporates. Before we go deeper, take a second, subscribe to SYC Soul, like this video, hit the bell so you won't miss what's coming, and share it with someone who might need this message. When you no longer feel compelled to prove yourself, something unexpected happens. Your old passions begin to dissolve. That's when many people panic. Why don't I enjoy the things I used to love? They ask. But Carl Jung would remind us, this is not an ending, it's a transformation. What once filled your ego cannot satisfy your soul. At first, this shift feels like loss. The activities that once gave you identity now seem flat. Yet beneath the emptiness, something far more important is emerging. Your inner world is demanding authenticity. The persona, the mask of roles and labels, has begun to fade, and in that fading, the soul begins searching for meaning beyond performance. This is why awakening often feels disorienting. For years, hobbies were not simply hobbies. They were anchors to your story. They told you who you were, the creative one, the athlete, the achiever. And when awakening strips away those labels, you can feel as though the ground has vanished beneath your feet. The map of your old life is gone, and the new map hasn't appeared yet. That gap feels like nothingness. But Jung didn't call this a mistake. He called it progress. The collapse of ego-driven values clears the field for something more genuine. It's a dismantling that opens the doorway to soul-aligned passions, activities born not from identity, but from authenticity. Yet between the old and the new lies the void, a silence, a strange emptiness that can feel unbearable. This space is where truth begins to surface. Many hobbies were never purely joy. They were escapes, painting to avoid loneliness, gaming to push down anxiety, singing to feel noticed in a world that overlooked you. On the surface, they appeared as passion, but underneath, they were strategies to hide unspoken pain. Carl Jung gave a name to those hidden wounds, the shadow. It holds the fears, griefs, and longings we bury because they don't fit the image we want to show. Awakening drags the shadow into light. Suddenly, the hobby you once relied on no longer soothes you because it was never about the activity. It was about avoiding what lay beneath. And when that mask drops, you can't run anymore. You're left face to face with what you've been avoiding all along. When the old coping mechanisms collapse, the soul seems to whisper, "No more distractions." Face the wound. That's why you lose interest. Not because you are suddenly dull or broken, but because those activities no longer serve their hidden purpose. The shield has fallen, and you are standing directly before your shadow. This stage can feel brutal. Many people describe it as depression or hopelessness. The words often sound the same. I don't enjoy anything anymore. Nothing excites me. Something must be wrong with me. But Jung's psychology flips this on its head. He insisted that nothing is broken. Instead, this is a rare opportunity, a moment when, for the first time, you are meeting yourself without filters or endless activity to cover the silence. Think of what begins to surface in that stillness. The loneliness you've tried to escape, the fear you've suppressed, the grief you've avoided, the longing you've hidden. Awakening strips away the covers so you can finally sit with what was buried. Painful? Yes, but also profoundly healing. Instead of painting over wounds, you begin to acknowledge them. Loneliness reveals itself not as a punishment, but as a doorway to self-connection. Fear shows itself not as weakness, but as a signal to honor. Grief is no longer an enemy, it becomes a teacher. Losing the escapes feels like losing yourself, yet what is really vanishing is the veil that kept you from seeing clearly. This descent into emptiness is not a detour. It is part of what mystics across time called the dark night of the soul. It's not despair for its own sake. It's the dismantling of illusions, the collapse of everything false that once defined your life. Jung explained it as the breakdown of the old psychic order. The values, hobbies, and pleasures that used to bring satisfaction suddenly disintegrate. And yes, it feels like a death. You might wake one morning and feel the spark has vanished. Music becomes noise. Painting feels forced. Gaming is repetitive. Even life itself may appear stripped of color. But here is the hidden truth. This death of meaning is not the end. It is a sacred transition, a doorway into the unknown self. The sense of death you feel during awakening is not destruction, but transformation. Jung compared this process to alchemy, where the psyche must enter a stage of nigredo, a dark dissolving before new life can emerge. In this stage, the old structures burn away. Everything that once gave meaning, hobbies, goals, pleasures, crumbles to ash. At first, it feels like your world is ending. In truth, it is being remade. This is why the dark night of the soul can feel unbearable. It strips away the old motivations and leaves you in silence. Nothing to chase, nothing to prove, nowhere to hide. And yet, this emptiness is sacred. It teaches that you are not your hobbies, not your achievements, not the roles others recognized you for. When all outer meaning falls apart, you are invited to touch something deeper, the ground of your being. Jung called this deeper center the self. Not the ego self craving validation, but the timeless self that simply exists. From this ground, meaning will eventually return, but not in the old form. New passions will arise, yet they will not be driven by ego. They will emerge from the soul itself. This transition is what Jung named individuation, a path of becoming whole, of discovering who you truly are beyond masks and roles. The loss of hobbies is not an end to creativity. It is the clearing of a field so that authentic creativity can take root. And here is where you may start to notice something. Activities you once used for validation might return in a new way. Music may resurface not as a performance for recognition, but as a language for your soul. Painting might return, no longer to prove talent, but as meditation. New passions may appear that you never expected: gardening, writing, walking in nature. These are not escapes, they are expressions of being. Now, I'd like to hear from you. Are you connecting with these truths as you listen? Tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching this from. And if you find value here, let me know. It helps me continue bringing you this work. If you find yourself in the emptiness, grieving the loss of your old hobbies, Jung would encourage patience. Don't force the old activities back into your life. They belong to a version of you that is dissolving. Instead, allow the silence. Let the emptiness have its place. It is not failure. It is part of the transformation. In this space, gentle experiments can help. Journaling, walking in nature, sitting in silence, or exploring forms of art you've never tried before can create openings. These aren't meant to fill the void in the old way, but to allow the self to guide you into new forms of expression. Jung advised asking a simple but powerful question. Was this hobby feeding my soul? Or was it feeding my persona? That question alone can shift everything. Suddenly, what once seemed like a meaningless loss becomes a cleansing. It reveals which parts of your life were authentic and which were masks. The process of individuation cannot be rushed. It unfolds in its own rhythm. First comes the collapse of old identities, then the confrontation with the shadow, then the silence of the void. Only afterward does something new emerge, something born from wholeness, not from performance. And this is where you discover that losing interest in ego-driven activities is not the end of passion. It is the clearing of space so that passions aligned with your deeper self can arise. These new joys are different. They are not about proving worth, gaining recognition, or escaping pain. They are about simply being. You may notice that when authentic creativity begins to return, it carries a different quality. Writing, painting, music, or even simple movement flows with ease, because they no longer serve an agenda. They become nourishment rather than escape. What looks like an ending is really the beginning of something far more authentic. If you've been resonating with these insights, and you want to keep exploring Carl Jung's wisdom on awakening, shadow work, and transformation, make sure you subscribe to SYC Soul, like this video, and hit the notification bell. That way, you won't miss upcoming episodes that dive even deeper. And if you know someone struggling with this very stage, share this video with them. It may be exactly what they need. The silence you're experiencing is not a punishment, it's an invitation. Jung emphasized that the void serves a purpose. It strips away false motivations, so you can no longer rely on masks. With nothing left to hide behind, you meet yourself as you are. That moment may feel frightening, but it is also the foundation for genuine transformation. When external meaning collapses, you are left face to face with your essence. Jung described this as touching the self, the deeper center of consciousness. Unlike the ego, the self doesn't demand validation or applause. It simply exists. And from this ground, new meaning begins to sprout, not in the form of old, ego-driven hobbies, but as authentic expressions of being. This is what individuation is all about: the gradual discovery of wholeness. It's the process of becoming who you were meant to be, beyond masks, roles, and the need for recognition. The emptiness you feel is a clearing, making room for passions that rise not from compulsion, but from alignment with your soul. At this point, many realize that creativity has not vanished, it has transformed. Painting may return, but not to prove talent. It becomes meditation. Music may resurface, not to impress, but to express. New activities, perhaps simple ones like tending a garden, walking under trees, or journaling in silence, appear with surprising depth. These aren't distractions. They are mirrors of your true self. And here lies the beauty. Joy shifts from doing in order to achieve to doing simply in order to be. The activity itself becomes nourishment. You no longer need results or recognition to justify it. This is how awakening reshapes passion. It aligns it with authenticity. Jung believed that this transformation is not about rejecting life, but about embracing it in a deeper way. You stop clinging to the persona and begin to live from the self. The hobbies of the past were tied to masks, but the new expressions that arise belong to your wholeness. So if you're standing in the void, remember what feels like emptiness is preparation. Something new is gestating, waiting to be born from your deeper self. As this transformation unfolds, one of the greatest challenges is patience. Jung reminded us that the psyche moves in rhythms, much like nature. Just as winter cannot be rushed into spring, the stage of emptiness cannot be forced into productivity. Many become restless here, wanting the new self to appear immediately. But if you allow the silence to do its work, the rebirth that follows is authentic rather than premature. It is tempting to grasp for old pleasures when the void feels unbearable. But Jung would caution against this. Returning to hobbies that once fed, the persona is like putting on clothes that no longer fit. They may provide brief comfort, but they hinder the deeper process. Instead, trust the unfolding even if it feels uncertain. This is also the stage where the unconscious begins to communicate more directly. Through dreams, symbols, and sudden insights, the self whispers guidance. Jung saw dreams not as meaningless fragments, but as messages showing where the psyche is trying to move. Paying attention to them can reveal hidden paths forward. A forgotten image in a dream or a recurring symbol might be the seed of a new passion aligned with your true nature. At the same time, the shadow continues to make itself known. Old fears, insecurities, and desires may resurface, sometimes more strongly than before. This is not regression, it is purification. The psyche is bringing unacknowledged material into awareness so it can be integrated. Rather than resisting, observing and accepting these aspects leads to wholeness. From this integration, new meaning begins to take root. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It emerges quietly, like dawn breaking after a long night. You may notice a renewed interest in simple things, a conversation, a book, the sound of rain that feels richer than before. These are not distractions. They are expressions of life flowing through your authentic self. And slowly, the emptiness that once felt unbearable begins to transform into spaciousness. It is no longer a void to be feared, but a ground from which true creativity, joy, and purpose can grow. Jung often compared this process to alchemy, where raw material is purified through fire until it reveals its essence. The stage of emptiness is like that fire. It burns away illusions and attachments. What survives the fire is what truly belongs to you, the essence that cannot be destroyed. Many people, when they first encounter this stage, feel they have lost themselves. But Jung would say the opposite is happening. You are shedding what was never truly you. The hobbies, roles, and identities that fall away were masks, not your essence. Their loss feels painful only because the ego clings to what is familiar. Out of this burning process, something unexpected begins to appear. A subtle clarity arises. You may notice that your sense of self is no longer scattered across many roles, but begins to feel centered, unified, and calm. Activities that once seemed meaningless begin to reveal a deeper purpose when approached without the pressure of ego. For example, what once was just painting to impress others may become a direct expression of your inner world. What once was music to perform may now be music to heal. Even simple actions, walking, listening, or being still begin to carry a richness you never noticed before. This shift is the mark of individuation taking root. Jung described individuation as the lifelong unfolding of the self. It does not end when hobbies change or identities fall away. Instead, those moments are turning points, places where the old breaks down to make space for the new. Each loss is a doorway into authenticity. And as you begin to live from this deeper center, a remarkable thing happens. You realize that meaning is no longer something you chase. It begins to flow naturally from your being. You don't need to manufacture joy. It arises on its own, in simple, ordinary moments that now feel extraordinary. This is the gift hidden inside the emptiness. What once felt like loss reveals itself as liberation. The fire of transformation clears away the false, so the true can shine through. One of Jung's most powerful insights was that the journey into the self is not about escape from life. It is about entering life more fully. The emptiness you encounter is not the end of meaning, but the restructuring of it. Old joys dissolve because they were tied to roles and expectations. What emerges instead is a meaning that comes directly from your inner wholeness. In this stage, it is common to feel a quiet strength forming within. At first, it may be subtle, almost unnoticed, but gradually you realize that your sense of identity is no longer dependent on the shifting approval of others. You begin to live from a place that feels rooted and steady. Jung believed this was evidence of individuation in motion. As the false layers of the persona fall away, your deeper center becomes visible. From this center, your new passions and expressions are born not to serve the ego, but to serve the unfolding of your true self. This is why many people discover that after the collapse of old hobbies, entirely new interests appear. They may not look impressive to the outside world, but they feel alive and authentic. A walk in the forest becomes a spiritual practice. Writing a few lines in a journal feels more nourishing than hours of activity once did. The shift is not in what you do, but in the spirit from which you do it. Even relationships change under this light. Connections built on roles and appearances fall away, while those rooted in authenticity deepen. What once felt like loneliness in the void slowly transforms into solitude filled with presence. You realize you are never truly alone, because you are in touch with the self, the deeper ground of being. And this recognition brings with it a profound peace. The struggle to chase meaning dissolves. Life itself becomes the expression. What began as emptiness reveals itself as fullness, not because you added more, but because you removed what false. In the end, Jung wanted us to understand that the loss of old passions is not a failure of spirit, it is a sign of growth. What falls away does so because it no longer belongs to the life you are meant to live. When the ego's desires are stripped away, what remains is the truth of your being. This process may feel like darkness, but Jung saw it as the necessary night before dawn. Without the disintegration of the false self, the authentic self cannot rise. The emptiness is the space where new life takes shape, the silence in which the voice of the self can finally be heard. And when you begin to hear it, you realize that what you thought was an ending was actually a beginning. Your new joys, your authentic passions, and your deeper connections to life do not arise from effort. They arise from alignment with who you truly are. This is the freedom that comes when the persona is dissolved and the self is revealed. You no longer need to ask whether your hobbies or activities are enough. You no longer need to measure yourself by what you achieve or how you appear. Life itself becomes meaningful, not because of what you add to it, but because you are finally present within it. This is the essence of individuation. Becoming whole, becoming real, becoming yourself. Jung devoted his work to guiding people through this path, reminding us that the emptiness we fear is the very passageway into fullness. Every collapse hides a renewal. Every silence holds a song waiting to be born. So if you find yourself in that in-between place, uncertain and stripped of the old, remember you are not lost. You are being remade. And what is forming within you is far more authentic than anything that has ever fallen away. Thank you for staying with me through this journey into Carl Jung's wisdom. If this touched something within you, subscribe to SYC Soul, like this video, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next exploration. And please, share this with someone who may be standing in the same emptiness right now. It could be the light they need.